Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I welcome you to the 10th of our 11-week series titled Journey Through Time. We're using the Chautauqua format to portray famous people in history. And on the 10th program, I welcome three famous people from the past. First of all is Mr. Thomas Jefferson, who was born in 1743 and died in 1826. And he was the third president of the United States. President Jefferson, welcome to our program.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. Pleasure to be here in your time.
And the second guest is Angie DeBow, who was born in 1890 and lived until 1988. And she was the famous author of 9 books, I believe, and one of her great causes in life was to advocate for American Indian rights. Welcome, Ms. DeBow, to our program.
Thank you for inviting me here today. I'm very happy to be with you.
And our third guest comes to us known as an Italian political philosopher who was born in 1469 and died in 1527, and that is Mr. Machiavelli. Welcome to our program.
I thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. I am very glad to be here again. I am gone a long time. You gonna give me time to talking?
In a short period of time.
Okay.
But I have to first welcome our regular panelist, Erna Reinhardt, who is the Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College. And good luck, Ms. Reinhardt, as you ask the first question.
Well, we have 3 wonderful characters with us today, and it's promising to be a great show, I'm sure. What I'd like to do, first of all, is ask each of you, now that you're here with us, to share with us and our viewers a little bit about an overview of your life and maybe a couple of things that you were most famous for so that we can set the stage for today's show. So let's start, first of all, with Angie DeBow.
Well, as I said, I'm very happy to be here. I was almost a little late because I just came from a parade. The Prairie City Days parade invites me to be Grand Marshal every year, and I'm very delighted to do that for them. It always surprises me because I said the most awful things about Oklahoma that anyone who ever touched a typewriter could have said, but nobody seems to hold that against me. So here I am. Famous. It's a little embarrassing to think you might be famous for something, but I am a historian, and I particularly was interested in writing about the Native American history and its connection to general American history, particularly from the Native perspective. It hadn't really been done before, and I grew up in Oklahoma. My parents moved there right after opening up the state for settlement. I was 9 years old. We came in a covered wagon, my mother and brother and I. Father had gone ahead of us with the farm equipment, and I was very excited about perhaps seeing Indian peoples, and I didn't see a single one. I was so disappointed. All I saw was other settlers and their sod houses and struggling and trying to make a living. And so when I decided to write, I thought that I would learn about the Indian people of Oklahoma. And I began to do the research, and I began to learn some very disturbing things. And so I continued to research, and I began to see Indian history and American history not as a history of settlement, but as a history of conquest. And I also learned that there had been a criminal conspiracy throughout Oklahoma And it went right to the top of the government level. Even the governor was involved. Judges and lawyers were involved in stealing the lands from the Indian people. And so I wrote about it. And I named names because I think that's what a historian should do. And those people, some of them were still alive, and they were not happy with what I wrote, of course. So it took a few years for someone to publish my book. But once it was published, people began to see the history in a new light, and other historians began to write history with more truth. And so I'm very proud of that.
Excellent. We'll
Thank
come back
you.
and we'll have you share with us some of your stories.
Thank you.
Our second guest is President Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, and you have, of all three people, I think, probably the most public life, and we know something about you, but share with us a little bit about the highlights of your life.
Well, the highlights of my life, and thank you for asking. What I feel are most important things that I've done during my existence are not the things that most of you would feel. My greatest pleasure, my greatest pride was founding the University of Virginia. And it's a great institution and a wonderful place for advanced learning, much as North Idaho College. What most of you, probably the first thing think of when you think of Thomas Jefferson is the Declaration of Independence, which was the document used by our Continental Congress to declare that we were free and independent of the rule of King George III. There are many other great things that I feel are important to me, and my home in Monticello was my pride and joy. The architecture, the design, the building are wonders to me, and where I would prefer to spend my time and not in the public life. As a speaker, I did not do much, but as a writer are the things that have held great pleasure for me during my time. And I continue to look forward to writing and putting my thoughts on paper so that those in the future can look at those and not determine whether that I'm right or wrong or even consistent in the things that I've done during my life, but at least to generate thought. Here in the West, something that you're celebrating at this time, the Lewis and Clark expedition. It was a great pleasure to commission both Meriwether Lewis and Captain Clark to come and explore. One of the wonders in the entire world is nature. And it was great pleasure when Western Virginia and Western New York were considered the frontier, which isn't true today. So I'll have a great pleasure. Our discussion today should be very enjoyable, and thank you very much for inviting me to come with you today.
Excellent. And our third guest is Niccol Machiavelli. Welcome to our show today, and please share with our viewers a little bit about your life.
Well, I am a Niccolo. I am my papa's boy. That is why my name is Niccolo de Bernardeo Machiavelli. It's no K. No K. It's Machiavelli. I am born, you know, in the 1469. And I am the greatest writer of prose in whole country of Italy. You believe this? You read it in my book? I never figured. The Prince, of course. Everybody hear about the Prince. I write him. Nobody reading. I die. Still nobody reading. As many years later, people gonna read little pieces, parts. The Prince is basically philosophical and political. And what you say? You have, the president. Democracy. He's gathered all kinds of people in the democracy. I say the Prince, and the lady, she knows the history. You never have democracy in the history. You have democracy at one time. In Greece, 3,000 people sit on hill, have lunch, go away. You got it, a king. You got it, a prince. Every family is got it one daddy, not a bunches of daddies. You got it one. This is the whole business. If you're gonna keep it, the country together in security, you're going to have it a one ruler, das ist der Prinz. And you have the prince today in this country, whether you think it or not. He never read the book. I never know if he read, but he is a do what the book say. So I also write many things, plays, or the popes. So one pope is not so happy with me, he put me in jail a while, but you have this. 2 out of 3 pope is not bad. I also write the history of the Florence. I write the art of war. I talking about all of the history of mankind and the war and how you do it. And I read the book. He is used to this very day. A mind book, but nobody remembers that book. Everybody remembers the prince.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Jefferson, I will start my questioning with you. The Declaration of Independence is something you're very well known for. You're obviously well known for being President of the United States. I want you to tell the story about when 5 of you were chosen by the Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, to draft the document. You and Ben Franklin and John Adams and Robert Livingston and Roger Sherman. It's been said in our time, and looking back at the study, that you wrote most of the document. I have a 2-part question. One is, did you write most of the document as this committee worked on it? And secondly, there was a paragraph that you placed in the first draft that was taken out by the Second Continental Congress because you wanted to really criticize or attack King George for bringing slaves to this country. You were always somewhat troubled by that, although you had slaves. So first of all, did you write most of the document?
The document as it exists today is not the document that I originally wrote. There were many, many revisions during the course of the discussions in chambers. The first draft had 45, 50 edits. The original document that I took into the committee, being asked by the others there to make a draft, was based upon 2 documents that I'd written earlier in my life in the state of Virginia. The discussions took place, compromises were made. I feel that my role there in the committee was as a secretary, also as the one to initiate the discussions because of the foundation that had been placed in the earlier documents that I'd written.
To move on quickly, but the paragraph about slavery.
It was important to me that this document show why this country was already independent from Britain, from King George. And I tried to place in the document different statements that would show that we were in a position because of what King George had done. King George, as this gentleman from Italy will certainly say, was the prince. He had established this country based upon what was good and right for England. It was the establishment and the further of trade. Part of that trade was the involvement of British ships bringing slaves to this country. It was, the foundation was there. The perpetuation of slavery in this country was done to support the merchants of England. That was the way it was established. But of course, that was a little pointed. Other members of the committee didn't feel that that should be in the document and wasn't one of the purposes of writing this declaration.
Even though you were in revolution and trying to get your independence from Great Britain, but was part of the reservation of not putting there too is because so many people that were at that Congress and would later help draft the Constitution had slaves and wanted to have slaves, and therefore would it make it more difficult if you put that in the document?
Well, it would certainly have put it more difficult. It was very necessary for the delegates from Virginia and the southern states to support the document. We were the breadbasket of the country.
And you needed that.
And the Congress needed that support. So that controversial element was removed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bowe, as I introduced you earlier, now that you come to visit us, although you've lived in a lot of our time up until 1988.
I have.
So you're more familiar than our other guests with the modern time. Why do you think that your work did impact to the extent it did? What your works, were they pricking the conscience of people for the mistreatment of a very important segment of our society? And those works that you have written, did they help bring change?
Very good questions. Certainly, they pricked the conscience once people were aware that these events had taken place.
So one of your steps was to inform people.
Yes, yes. People knew what I knew about Indian people, what we had read in books in grade school, and it was all written from the dominant culture's perspective and not from the native perspective of what was taking place. And there were a lot of mistruths and misinformation in the history, and I thought that it needed to be corrected. And so once I began to do that, and others began to read that work, then it actually, historians today claim that it was a transformation, a revolution in the way that history about Native peoples was written.
You've often been described by some people also as an anthropologist, and I know you've had some problems with that.
Yes.
But wasn't your work a lot like anthropologists? Is that you were dealing with the history?
I used a method of anthropology, of ethnography, of actually talking with Indian peoples and asking them how they saw the history, and asking them what was happening and what was the truth of the different types of policies that were placed upon them. And so in that sense, it was done in an anthropological form of research. That method was being used and hadn't been used in history before.
Thank you. In our time, we do pronounce it Machiavelli, but Mr. Machiavelli, we will be respectful of, how you pronounce your name. Many political scientists have read or used in political theory classes the Prince. And I know this is somewhat sensitive to you, but really what has been in modern time interpreted from your works is that as you address the question of when a society, a government, decides what for that country is the good end, that if what we call ethical means do not get you to that end, then all means are justified to reach that end. And you've been highly criticized in modern time that's saying that your advocacy of any means could also corrupt the ends. Would you like to address that charge against your book, The Prince?
Oh, boy. Now, if, like you say, what I say is, God that your ends are just. You never make a decision. What is just is just. If the ends is just, then you make it, use it, the means to get them. It's simple. You corrupted the ends, never was just. Now you talk like old Prince. You sound like, the King George relative, the big man, Henry VIII, him. He living in my time, He is not a good prince. He is not a new prince. He lacks a virtue, not the virtue with E. Virtue, V-I-R-T-U. This is manliness. Man is strong when he must be strong. He is soft when he must be soft.
But when you have concluded that it is a just end, and you
want to get to the end, you gotta do it.
What you have avoided is, what if a just means won't get you there? Does your book indicate that then you have to use an unjust means to get there when it's the only way to get to the just end?
Unjust means? No, the end is just. It's like the God. He say, hey, this is the right way. Whatever God he gonna do, mysterious ways, he gonna get it. And man, he say, You wanted country to survive. This is good. If country never survive, this is bad. Country gonna survive. This is good. Use it a means unnecessary. But have the virtue.
I don't think, Erna, that I'm going to get the complete answer to that, so we'll proceed with you.
Okay, my first question is going to be to President Jefferson, and I'm curious to be able to talk to you about your feelings about Monticello and why that was such a wonderful place for you, and what was your inspiration for having that developed. Tony will probably ask you more political questions, but I'm interested in why Monticello was so important to you and why was it so special.
Let's start, as with all great loves in our life, it starts as a child. I was born and raised in Western Virginia, which was the frontier. I was fortunate enough to inherit the top of a mountain, which had a beautiful view. It was home. During the course of my life, I did not get to spend the time with my children and family due to other obligations and other things that the country called upon me and my fellow countrymen called upon me to do. But home is home, as it is to all of us. You establish your roots there. You look for the things that are going to fulfill you from the inside, and that's from the heart. That's what Monticello did. I was able to design the home. I had the means to build it. Now, of course, it went through several transformations during its life, and there were many things that I made efforts to do there that due to financial obligations or obligations to my country that I was not able to accomplish or didn't get to finish in the ways that I wanted. Crop rotation, raising wildlife, husbandry, many of the wonderful things that you could see passing on, and that was the world to me, and was a great pleasure spending my time there. It was the one place where there weren't the demands of the rest of the world on me.
Excellent, thank you. And Mrs. Debo, I'd like for you to share with us. You were a very controversial figure in the Oklahoma history, and as I understand it, you were contracted to write a book about Oklahoma, and then when that book was published, the chapter that you had written was replaced by a different chapter. Share with us that story.
I still feel bad about that every time I think about it. I did the introduction chapter for the historical book on Oklahoma, and when it was published, they had my name on that chapter, but that chapter was written by someone else, and it was full of so much misinformation. They did not want to hear the truth about Oklahoma. They finally did change that, and the truth is in there today. But of course, there are lots of old publications on people's library shelves, and it still makes me feel bad.
I also understand you were a very highly educated woman. You got your PhD.
Yes.
Share with us your story about you wanted to pursue a master's degree in history.
Yes, and eventually received my doctorate degree in history. But there simply was no place for a woman in the field of history at that time. You could not get hired at the university. And that's when I turned to teaching, or to writing.
Excellent. Okay, Mr. Machiavelli, how's that?
Very good.
Thank you. I understand that it was very important to you that Italy was united, and I want to ask you, why was that so important to you?
Very good question. Because this is my home. This is like you have it in your country, the United States. In Italy, we have many states. He separate after the Roman Empire. He fallen. Not a Romans. Not a good prince, but example. It's not a good. Why I write it the prince? They do it better. it is very important for the security of the people to once again unite Italy, which is, I am sure, today, greatest country in whole world ever. You better believe it.
On that note, I would ask my next question to the third President of the United States, Mr. Jefferson. You can talk a little more about your life in the sense that I know that upon your death and what you had requested for your tombstone was not being President of the United States or the other national positions you held, but rather you were very proud of what you had done in Virginia in regard to liberty. Share with us, and also the fact that you had been the father of the University of Virginia.
As I mentioned in the previous question, home was extremely important. Even as early as the Second Continental Congress and writing the Declaration of what's now the Declaration of Independence, I spent a great deal of correspondence with my fellows in Virginia to establish the Virginia Constitution, to make a good framework for the country that I lived in. At that time, we were a united group of states trying to form a country. After being president and getting to go back to Virginia and spend my time there, a great deal of my efforts went into founding the University of Virginia. I was very fortunate in my education, and I wanted to go there.
I have to interrupt you because we're almost out of time. I do want our audience to know who portrayed our famous people. First of all is Randy Bennett, who played Thomas Jefferson, and Randy Bennett is in charge of food services at North Idaho College and does a marvelous job in that way, and thank you very much for doing that. Our second person is Marian Ackerman, who teaches in the Division of Social Sciences, Anthropology, and Marian, you've done characters before, and again, we thank you for doing Angie DeBow. And our third individual is Jeff Jeske, proud to say, a former student at North Idaho College in political science, went on and got his baccalaureate degree and spent some time in law school, and he was here to play the famous Italian philosopher. Thank all three of you. It's been a pleasure having you here. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll join us again next week at this same time when we will conclude this very long series by doing number 11 in our series of these programs on Journey Through Time. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.